Chapter 2. Opioids are not bad, only your relationship to them is. My good friend Scott has played in a softball league since he was in his 20s. Back then, he played one night game a week and every Sunday morning during softball season. Injuries were common among players, and Scott was no exception. The first injury he had was from sliding into a base. He totally messed up his shoulder. He was prescribed hydrocodone for the pain and was recommended to start physical therapy after a short period of resting the shoulder. Scott used the hydrocodone even less than was prescribed to him. Once the bottle eventually ran out, he didn't think anything of it. He was not at all attached to opioids. Several years later, Scott jammed his thumb really badly while playing softball. His doctor prescribed him a bottle of 40 Vicodin in the dosage of 5 mg hydrocodone, 500 mg acetaminophen. After using less than was prescribed for a second time, he eventually ran out of the prescription. This time, he also didn't think anything of it. He had no care in the world to ask his doctor to be prescribed more. He had no thoughts of finding hydrocodone to purchase and use illegally. He simply just wasn't hooked on the pills, and he didn't experience any negative consequences. Scott had a healthy relationship with opioids and used them medicinally for acute pain relief due to sports injuries. Plenty of people have identical or similar relationships with opioids. They are easily able to use opioids for short-term pain relief needs, and then they can stop without any mental or emotional effort. Some get very minor symptoms from discontinuing opioids after a few weeks of daily use, but they just feel a little uncomfortable for a few days typically, and despite this, they have no desire to use more opioids. Many of the folks don't even know they are feeling a bit uncomfortable due to discontinuing pills after prolonged daily use. Why? Most doctors that prescribe opioids for an acute injury don't educate their patients about the possibility of becoming physically dependent and then needing to taper to prevent a cold turkey withdrawal process. On the opposite side of the spectrum, you see completely different behaviors. When I was 22 to 24 years old, I was a drug dealer. 95% of my sales were cannabis. This was long before cannabis became legal to use recreationally in California. Around 5% of my sales were from drugs that I had on rare occasions, which consisted of mostly magic mushrooms and very rarely cocaine, ecstasy, mescaline, and Oxycontin. When I was 22, I was a big-time cannabis dealer in my town. I had several close friends that I fronted weed to. I would give them between an ounce and a half pound with little or no money up front, and they would go and sell it in smaller amounts, make a profit, then bring back the money they owed me. During the height of my drug dealing career, I witnessed my friend Kevin, who I fronted weed to, get completely addicted to opioids. I had taken Vicodin several times and even Oxycontin several times, but even though I really enjoyed the effects, I never became addicted, and I never even craved the pills one time. But my friend Kevin was different. After finding someone that was selling Oxycontin, he purchased a pill, crushed it up, and snorted it. He loved the feeling it gave him. After snorting that first pill, Kevin became totally obsessed with getting more. His entire life became dedicated to using prescription opioids daily. Soon he had a tolerance and needed more and more to feel the effects. Soon after that, he had a physical dependence, meaning he needed a certain amount of opioids in his blood daily to prevent him from going through a withdrawal syndrome. Not long after this, Kevin began purchasing heroin, which was cheaper, stronger, and never dried up. He was getting his heroin from the Chinese mafia. I never saw Kevin anymore. He had been fired from his job, and now instead of getting ounces fronted from me, he was getting pounds of cannabis fronted to him from the man in the Chinese mafia. All of his money went towards supplying his heroin addiction. His live-in girlfriend broke up with him and moved out. Next, he let his heroin/cannabis dealer move in with him for free. One day he screwed up bad and was robbed at gunpoint for a pound of cannabis. His dealer told him that it was his mess and that he still owed him the $3,700 for the pound, even though he had no way to come up with that kind of money. The Chinese mafia drug dealer told Kevin that he had to pay him back or he'd get killed. Kevin wasn't able to come up with the money from selling cannabis, so he resorted to robbing a friend of his that had around $10,000 in cash and $5,000 worth of weed. Eventually, Kevin's heroin addiction took everything but his life from him. I never saw him again, but heard that he moved to the East Coast because he had burned too many people and was now in danger of getting killed. Kevin's relationship with opioids was not a healthy one. In fact, it was about as unhealthy of a relationship with a drug as a person can have. Before he took that first OxyContin, he had a full-time job doing what he loved, cooking. He also had a nice apartment by the ocean and a wonderful girlfriend that lived with him. He had great friends, and we all loved each other very much and had each other's backs. We were a tight crew and had plenty of fun together. Within just a couple of months after taking opioids, Kevin's life was upside down. He was psychologically addicted, physically addicted, and did whatever he could, even robbing close friends, to support his opioid addiction. The truth is that opioids are neither good nor bad. Only a person's relationship to them can be good or bad, healthy or unhealthy, or neutral. It's a broad spectrum in between healthy and unhealthy. Despite all of the associated negative aspects, addiction, overdose, crime, etc., prescription opioids like oxycodone, hydrocodone, and all the others still have a positive intent. Many are commonly prescribed for the treatment of moderate to severe pain. Some are prescribed for opioid use disorder. These prescription opioid drugs, along with heroin and fentanyl, attach to specific proteins called opioid receptors, which are located on nerve cells in the brain, spinal cord, GI tract, and other organs. Once these drugs attach to the opioid receptors, their effects come on, which include, but are not limited to, pain relief, euphoria, sedation, constipation, nausea. As human beings, we already have an endogenous pain-killing system that is capable of producing pain relief, sedation, and euphoria. This natural pain relief system is activated when we exercise, eat certain foods, e.g. dark chocolate and chili peppers, or perform other activities. For example, imagine a man who has just run 5 miles along the beach. As a result of this intense physical exertion, his body naturally produces its own opioid chemicals known as endorphins and enkephalins, thus reducing pain and promoting euphoria naturally. As a teenager, I became totally in love with surfing. It was my great obsession from the time I was 13 all the way to at least 24 years old. When I went surfing, I would get a huge endorphin high. Surfing and other forms of exercise also create many other mood-enhancing neurochemicals that add to the pleasant feelings. More on this in an upcoming chapter. I remember so many occasions where I had come out of the water, showered off by the lifeguard tower, and then was just relaxing with friends, watching other people surf while we dried off and absorbed even more of the Southern Cali sunshine. It was a naturally euphoric feeling that has been unmatched by anything else I've done in life, even drugs and alcohol. At one time, opioids referred to synthetic opiates only, drugs created to emulate opium, however different chemically. Now, the term opioid is used for the entire family of opiates, including natural, synthetic, and semi-synthetic. An opioid is any agent that binds to opioid receptors, protein molecules located on the membranes of some nerve cells, found principally in the central nervous system and gastrointestinal tract, and elicits a response. There are 4 broad classes of opioids: endogenous opioids, naturally produced in the body, endorphins, enkephalins, dynorphins; opium alkaloids, such as morphine and codeine; semi-synthetic opioids, such as heroin, oxycodone, and buprenorphine; and fully synthetic opioids, such as methadone, fentanyl, and tramadol, that have structures unrelated to the opium alkaloids. Prescribed opioids can be used medicinally and responsibly under the care of a physician for acute pain, chronic pain, opioid use disorder, and certain other issues. For many people, the medicinal and responsible use of opioids helps them to have a much better quality of life. They have a healthy relationship to opioids and don't abuse them and don't become obsessed with them. On the opposite side of the spectrum, there are people that have very unhealthy relationships with opioids. Why do some people get totally addicted while others do not? We'll go more into this in the next chapters, but some of the primary reasons is a person's unique biochemical and genetic makeup and whether or not they've experienced trauma in their childhood. My friend Kevin found me and friend requested me on Facebook a few years ago. He stated that after years of not abusing opioids, he relapsed and was on them once again. He had injured himself working and was prescribed Norco for pain. He used his entire prescription in almost no time and began purchasing pills from a friend of his. He stated it was a good thing he didn't know where to get heroin in the town he was now living. Over the past few years, I've kept in contact with him, and he has continued to quit and relapse over and over again. I've now corresponded with more than 10,000 people with opioid use disorder over the years, and I've still never met a single person that was an opioid-addicted person who has been able to use them responsibly after a long period of being addicted to them. Perhaps people like this exist, but if so, I'd guess they are the exception and not the rule. Why did I not get addicted even though I loved opioids right from the start? Why did Kevin get addicted? Why did my friend Scott not get addicted? What types of people get addicted to opioids? What makes a person more prone to opioid addiction? Let's discuss this next when we cover the faces of opioid addiction.